Want to have your children's book featured on a podcast? We're interviewing the host of the Storyland podcast, Jessica Snider, to teach us just how to do that on today's Journey to KidLit podcast, episode number 7. Welcome to the Journey to KidLit podcast. I'm your host, Brooke Van Sickle, and each week on the show, we'll discuss what it takes to write, publish, and market your kids' book. Let's get started. This episode is brought to you by BiblioKid Publishing, the children's book publisher that donates 50% of their profits back to education. For a look at their books or to learn more, visit bibliokidpublishing.com. Hey there, and welcome to the Journey to KidLit podcast. Today on the show, I have a very special guest with us, Jessica here with the Storyland podcast, and she's going to be talking to us all about what she does and how that can help us as writers. Hi, Jessica. Welcome to the show.
Hey, Brooke. Thanks so much for having me.
Of course. Yeah, I'm so glad you're here. So tell us a little bit about the Storyland podcast. When did you start it and why?
So the Storyland podcast is pretty new. We started just a couple months ago, but this podcast is a podcast for kids where we read independent kids books, so written by independent authors with cute music and silly sound effects in the background. And yeah.
Oh, I love it. That sounds awesome. So what kind of books do you read?
So we mostly read books that are like really full of adventure. We love books that the kids sort of can really imagine in their head, and we just add the sound effects to kind of help with that. But we really, really, really want to, initiate their imagination with the stories that we read.
I love it. Do you do like picture books or like mostly like easy reader chapter books?
We mostly do picture books just because the length for our target audience is around 3 to 8 years old, so their attention spans it's a little bit short. Yeah. So we try to keep the episodes around anywhere between 8 and 15 minutes. Okay. And that usually is like a picture book. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So are there any favorites that you're reading right now or you have read for the podcast?
Honestly, I'm really loving the book that we did this week. We just read a book called Ready for Rescue by Katie Pye. And this book is like a twisted fairy tale. So it's about the real Rapunzel who is really, really messy and doesn't want to take a shower, clean her hair. And it just might affect whether or not the prince wants to come and save her. So I think it's really cute, and I'm really enjoying this one.
Oh, that sounds awesome.
Yeah.
So do you have any advice for what makes a book stand out to a reader?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for me, especially, I'm always looking for books that lend themselves well to a podcast. So I always need a book that really, it really excites the imagination. There's usually a lot of adventure going on, a lot of action. It's usually very plot-based. Mm-hmm. So for me, if anyone's looking to submit to a podcast, for sure, you always have to think about, the platform that it's going to be read on. And so if it's just telling, if it's just a conversation of people sitting in a room, right, there's not so much that I can add in terms of sound effects and make it more exciting when they can't see the pictures.
Right, exactly.
So so always the action-based stories, for sure.
Yeah, that makes sense. So is there anything that would make you not want to read a book?
I think for sure, kids don't really love when it's very obvious that a lesson is being taught to them. Mm-hmm. I love the books when it's okay when there are messages in there, and it's amazing when you can pick up on the message, but it can't be so blatant. I find so when it's wrapped up in the story, that's sort of the best way to go. That's what I like the most about it. So not sort of like telling you what to do, but you kind of pick up on the message because the adventure was so cool.
Right, exactly. We talk about that a lot. You don't want to do a didactic picture book or anything.
Exactly. Yeah. They don't want it to be obvious that you're teaching them something.
Nobody wants it to be obvious. You're being taught something.
Yeah, nobody wants a lecture, not even kids.
No. So how do you get connected with the books for your podcast?
So right now I've been reaching out to mostly a lot of Facebook groups for independent authors. So I kind of go into all of the social media groups and just kind of say, hey, I'm looking to support independent authors, and just send links to my website and have people submit to the show.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, that's such a great idea, because especially for indie authors trying to find marketing ways and avenues to reach out and get new
readers, that's a really awesome thing you're doing.
Yeah, well, I'm a big advocate for indie authors. I'm hopefully an aspiring author myself, and I can understand how hard it is to kind of get your book out there, especially when you're doing it all on your own without the help of a publisher. So if I can sort of be a little bit of help in that respect and kind of be a medium to get it in the hands and ears of more people, I mean, what a nice extra benefit.
Exactly. Yes. So have you had any feedback on authors on how this helps their books?
Actually, yeah, I was so thrilled. Last week's author sent me a beautiful email just saying that her book actually just came out a couple of weeks ago. And since the podcast aired, we had a lot of actually messages on our site of people who have then since bought the book.
That's awesome.
Podcast. So that to me really warmed my heart. It really felt like, okay, my mission is working. People are hearing the story and then they go and buy the book. So that made my day.
Yes, I love that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So are there some standard etiquette tips that you would suggest for an author who wanted to reach out to someone who does a podcast like yourself?
I would say make sure that you know the show that you're submitting to and make sure you really know what kind of content they're looking for. I think that I really think that in terms of etiquette, I mean, obviously be polite and be kind, but really make sure that you're giving them something that they need and they're looking for. Because otherwise, as much as I wish I could read every story on my show, I need something that lends itself well to, sound effects, right? And if it's just not the right fit, then it doesn't really work. So really do your research. Make sure it's the kind of book they're looking for.
Yeah, exactly. It's the same thing like when you're submitting to a publisher or anything.
Right.
Yeah. So does your podcast offer anything other than just the actual readings to either the readers or the writers?
Absolutely. So for the readers, we do offer coloring pages that go with every book. So if you head over to our website and just sign up for our newsletter, every week we will send the coloring pages from each book. So that's really fun. And then for the authors, we want to give them as much exposure as possible and sort of a bit greater chance for the audience to get to know them. So I always offer the author to write a blog post that goes with the book. So if there is a message that you're trying to share with the kids or a way that you want your readers to be using the book, I always give them the opportunity to write a blog post and sort of give tips or advice on what they can do after they read the book. So can they do an activity? Is there a conversation that parents could be having with their kids, right? What kind of a message sort of is going along with that story?
Yes, I love that. That's so great. So what are one of the biggest tips right now for anyone who's hoping to write a children's book in the efforts of wanting to send it to you?
Oh, well, the first step I would say is just start, do it, write the book, put yourself out there. And second of all, I would say don't hesitate. I'm always looking for new books. So just reach out and send it in. And I think people's biggest obstacle is fear. So if they can just get over the fear and reach out, and who knows, we might just say yes, and chances are I will. So
I love it. And when you say indie publishing, just for some of our listeners out there, does that mean just self-published or does that also mean with a small press?
I'm okay with either one as long as the small press gives permission for me to read it on the podcast.
All right.
So whoever owns the copyright to the book, as long as they're okay with it, I'm good with it too.
Okay, yeah. Perfect. Yeah, that's good, especially because a lot of people use small houses and they still have to do a lot of all their marketing too.
Yeah. And that's really my mission, right? If there's anything, if I can do anything to help with that marketing and just get it into the ears of more kids, then power to them, right?
Yeah, exactly. Well, Jessica, if anyone wanted to learn more about you or the podcast, where should they go?
So they can head over to thestorylandpodcast.com. If they wanted to submit a book, we have a little button on there that says submit a book, or you can go to thestorylandpodcast.com/book submission. And there's a form there that you can fill out and send us your book.
Perfect. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for having me on, or having you on the show. For joining us.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Oh, yes. Thanks.
Thanks again to Jessica from the Storyland podcast for joining us today. If you'd like to learn more about her or her podcast, visit journeytokidlit.com/podcast under episode 7 to download the show notes. And that about does it for today's episode of the Journey to KidLit podcast. Thank you so much for joining me today. If you have a thought about today's episode or a suggestion for future ones, send me an email or reach out via Twitter. And if you liked what you heard, be sure to leave a review, and while you're there, subscribe to be notified of new episodes. Until next time, happy writing!